Hello everybody and welcome back to a new episode of The Great Girls Formula. I'm your host Zoe and today we're going to be recapping the whole Belgian Grand Prix weekend. We're going to talk about the qualifying, sprint race, the actual race, the rain, everything that we can think of. And then we're also going to be doing our normal technical tidbit. And today we're going to be talking all about the effects of elevation on the Formula One car. So I hope you're excited because I definitely am, and let's just get started. Let's start with a little bit of news from the week. So a little bit of fun news I saw was Oscar Piastri's mom actually posted a picture with Yuki Tsunoda. Apparently there's a bit going around that he is her adopted son. This all came about from when Oscar Piastri tweeted about wanting to find some Monegasque roots so that he could claim that Monaco was his home Grand Prix, and Leclerc was like, oh, I'll adopt you for the weekend. So his mom joked that there was an opening for a son, and she chose Yuki Tsunoda as the replacement. So I think it's very cute whenever that kind of thing happens. You get to see the friendships and things that go on between the drivers and the drivers' families. There's also still been quite a lot of talk around Christian Horner's exit from Red Bull and the fact that Red Bull have their new team principal this weekend. It was definitely an important time for the team. I feel like Red Bull have perhaps lost a little bit of direction at the minute between Horner's exit and the fact that they're not going to have Max Verstappen forever. I feel like they're probably feeling a little bit of nerves in terms of how they're going to keep on going, and they've lost a lot of people like Adrian Newey and things. So it's just interesting because I think that they're going to be in a little bit of a limbo for a while, and we'll just have to wait and see what that means. So for the race tires this weekend, Pirelli actually skipped a compound when deciding on the tires. This was a decision made to hopefully kind of encourage a little bit more strategy during the race, make it a little bit more entertaining, hopefully have a two-stop. With the rain and the way that everything went, that didn't really wind up happening, but it's an interesting idea. There was only one practice session this weekend as it was a sprint weekend, which is always fun to just have a little bit more racing in the mix. There wasn't really much to report on practice. Piastri was the quickest. Then we had sprint quali. So everybody has to go out on medium tires, and then they're allowed to do switch to the softs on the last qualifying session, I believe. So in SQ1, Antonelli had a bit of a spin early on, and he even impeded Russell a little bit slightly, which was probably a little annoying. Piastri and Norris were easily just at the top of the ranks, flying away with it. But this was a very tough weekend for Lewis Hamilton. He just struggled this weekend when it came to qualifying. And I've been saying for weeks now about how he cuts it way too close about getting out of Q1. It's like he only does 2 laps, and then the first one's never quick enough to keep him within Q1. And the first one is never quick enough to get him out of Q1. So he paid the price for that this weekend. He wasn't able to improve on his fastest lap because he locked up and had a little bit of a spin in the final chicane of his flying lap, and he was knocked out during Q1. Other people knocked out included Albon, Hülkenberg, Hamilton, Colapinto, and Antonelli. Then we had SQ2, which was a battle between Piastri, Norris, and Verstappen, with Leclerc also setting a few impressive laps. Piastri only just wound up making it through, though, as he had a lap deleted, so that's always a little bit scary. And like I said, that's kind of similar to what happened to Hamilton later during normal qualifying. And it's just like these drivers, you just got to get that quick lap in there as soon as possible. Obviously, with the way that the track heats up and the way that you're warming up the tires and all of that, you can't do that right away, and everyone's going to get quicker than you. So I understand why it doesn't always happen that way, but goodness, it leaves a lot of stress. Knocked out in Q2 was Lawson, Tsunoda, Russell, Alonso, and Stroll. Then for the final session of sprint qualifying, it was really just a one-lap shootout for everybody on the soft tires, and Piastri wound up on pole position. So our top 10 were Piastri, Verstappen, Norris, Leclerc, Ocon, Sainz, Behrman, Gasly, Hadjar, and Bortoleto. It was exciting to see Bortoleto up in the top 10. Next, we have the sprint race, and I think the sprints are so much fun to watch because they're just so intense and so quick. Colapinto actually started from the pit lane due to a change in his rear wing. Pierre Gasly was also having issues. He had a water system issue, and so he wasn't able to start the race, but he still did join 2 laps in, which honestly I didn't even realize. I was suddenly saw his name on the board +2, and I was oh, interesting. But I guess they were using it as a test session, which is honestly smart. If you can, why not? Verstappen pulled an incredible move on Piastri in the first lap that basically set the race, and I'll come back to this later because I honestly think that Piastri learned a lot from Verstappen doing this move on him, but we'll come back to that later. Leclerc was able to take P3 from Norris as well pretty early on, but eventually Norris was able to get him back. And Verstappen was able to hold on to that first position throughout the race, which was honestly very impressive. He described it as basically doing a race of qualifying laps. So he was like really pushing the car, really making sure that he was not making any mistakes, going as quickly as possible in order to keep the McLarens behind him. Because I did wonder if this would turn into like some kind of three-way battle with Norris closing in as well, but the time just wasn't quite there. It was a pretty difficult race for both Hamilton and Antonelli, who were both started very far back, but Hamilton at least would make up for it in the next day. So in the end of the sprint, we had Piastri, Norris, Leclerc, Ocon, Sainz, Behrman, Hadjar, Bortoleto, and Lawson as the top 10. So the way that the schedule works for the sprint weekend is on Friday they had the practice session and they had sprint qualifying, and then on Saturday they had the sprint session and then they had qualifying later on in the day. There were all of the usual complaints about pit lane traffic, but there were a few little incidents. Actually, Alonso actually claimed that he nearly crashed into Behrman, and Hülkenberg and Stroll actually had contact in the pit lane. I think that was investigated for an unsafe release. I'm not sure exactly how that played out, but I'm pretty sure like Stroll literally just rode over the top of Hülkenberg's front wing. It was like literally like merging into traffic. It was very interesting. I was like, this is kind of weird. This is not something you usually see, but again, a tough day for Hamilton and Antonelli. Antonelli was really pushing. He didn't seem to really be having like issues mechanically with the car or anything. He just qualified pretty low down. I think he's just been struggling a lot the last few races. There was a lot expected of him this year, and I feel like at the beginning of the year he was really performing really well and doing great, and he's kind of plateaued a little bit recently and had some more difficult races, but we do have to remember he is just a rookie. He's barely 18, and not everybody can be Max Verstappen and a world champion like the minute he steps into a race car. I just hope that he is able to keep his motivation up, keep pushing, because there is definitely talent there. And I hope that Mercedes just continues to give him that opportunity. I have been hearing some rumors here and there about him not staying at Mercedes, but I don't think that there is any truth to them, I hope. Meanwhile, Hamilton again was out in Q1 due to his second lap time getting deleted because of track limits, which is actually crazy. Like, to have Lewis Hamilton out in both Q1 sessions of the weekend just doesn't make sense to me. And he sounded so sad afterwards. I hate when Lewis is sad. He's literally so down, and it's just like, oh, I wish I could give you a hug. I do think his race performance the next day helped a little bit with the way that all of these qualifying sessions went, but man, that was hard to watch him and his interviews afterwards. So knocked out, we had Hamilton, Colapinto, Antonelli, Alonso, and Stroll. In Q2, Piastri set the benchmark. He also seemed quite annoyed as everybody came out of the pits. He was like, oh, some people definitely need bigger mirrors. So more traffic issues. Unfortunately, the Haas's didn't do as well in this qualifying as they did in the sprint. So knocked out, we had Ocon, Behrman, Gasly, Hülkenberg, and Sainz. Then for Q3, it was a battle between our top contenders. Once again, mostly between the McLarens. Verstappen looked like he had third for a while. He seemed like he had that in the bag, but Leclerc was actually able to push him down to fourth and take third position, which was very exciting. I was quite happy to see that. Piastri was not able to take the pole position away from Norris, however. So Norris set the fastest time. Another notable mention is that Albon was able to take fifth place above Russell, which I think is pretty impressive. The Williams seem to have been struggling in the past few weeks, but maybe Mercedes is struggling even more. We also had Yuki Tsunoda, who was able to qualify in 7th, which was a pretty good position for him. I was happy to see him in Q3 and up there in the ranks. So our top 10 wound up being Norris, Piastri, Leclerc, Verstappen, Albon, Russell, Tsunoda, Hadjar, Lawson, and Bortoleto. Again, Bortoleto, he has had a pretty good weekend being up there in Q3 for both sessions. Okay, now it's time to talk about the race. Also, I'm so sorry if I'm going at breakneck speed. I am trying to film this before I go to work today. So it's currently 7 a.m. and yeah, I need to leave in 15 minutes. So we're in a little bit of a hurry today. Okay, so the race, we thought the race was starting. There was a lot of umming and ahhing. at the beginning because of the rain, and they went out for like a minute, like hardly anything, and they were like, yeah, no, this is not good. So they came back in under the red flag and had a pretty long delay of about an hour and a half, and there was a lot of debate, and a lot of people were not necessarily happy about the length of the delay. I think that Spa is always a fun race to watch with a little bit of weather issues, and by the time that they went out on track, it really like wasn't even that wet, like if you weren't on the racing line especially, but on the racing line after a couple laps it seemed pretty dry. And I think that people were a little bit disappointed just because, you know, it's exciting to see whenever you have the rain element in there. It's like a big part of Formula One that doesn't happen in every race. And I think that whenever there is an opportunity for that, it is good to take advantage of that. That being said, Spa is a historically very dangerous track. Unfortunately, a lot of fatalities have occurred there, and you never want anybody to get seriously injured, and you have to hope that the stewards calling this had that in mind when they made the decision to not bring anybody out. And it really is a matter of, okay, well, have they found the balance between making sure that it stays exciting and there are inherent risks to Formula One, and how do you toe the line between like keeping it exciting and keeping it safe? And I think a lot of people kind of felt like they maybe teetered a little bit too far into just the keeping it safe, that we lost some of the exciting element of what this race could have been. And so, you know, it's hard to call. I'm not really sure that they struck that balance in this particular instance, but at the end of the day, it's probably better to be safe than sorry. Anyway, so they had like 4 or 5 laps, I think, under the safety car before they did a rolling start that Piastri definitely took that rolling start to his advantage. And as I mentioned before, he used like basically the same move. It was like watching the sprint race, but like with different cars. And he used basically the same move that Verstappen had used on him during the sprint race to overtake Norris. So that's why I think he really learned from his mistake in that. Piastri wound up pitting on lap 12, and then Norris, they didn't double stack Norris, he came in like a lap later, and it was a little bit of a slow pit stop as well, so it left him like 9 seconds away from Piastri. And it was kind of a debate the whole race as to whether Norris was going to be able to catch up and give him a run for first place. I know we were all sitting there like with a little bit of tension, like being like, oh, is he gonna get up there? Is he not? But unfortunately, towards the end of the race, Norris just kept making like little mistakes here and there, and he made one particular mistake, and it kind of just meant that there wasn't going to be enough time for him to catch back up, and he wound up finishing at 3.4 seconds behind Piastri. As I mentioned, Hamilton was able to have a pretty impressive showing after his pretty dire qualifying sessions the day before. He was able to climb 11 places so that he was able to finish in 7th, and it was actually really fun. Like, this was honestly probably one of my favorite parts of the race. Watching it was getting to see Hamilton. I feel like it was very flawless driving from him, very reminiscent of old Hamilton, and just the way he used to be, and his determination to just get through a pack. And I think that it just goes to show that he is still very much qualified to be on that track. And even if qualifying went poorly, he has a lot of skill in that car, and I think that his way of handling that and getting through that just goes to show that he's getting to be better with the car. He is learning lessons, he is figuring things out, and he still has it. You can't count him out of any kind of mix just quite yet. I also wanted to mention Leclerc and Verstappen, because although there wasn't like I don't think there were any major switches between the two. I don't think that they ever actually wound up overtaking each other, but Leclerc definitely had to put up a fight to keep Verstappen at bay. I imagine it was quite an intense race for him in terms of like concentration and just making sure that Verstappen stayed as far behind him as possible. Bortoleto and Hulkenberg, the two Saubers, actually switched positions on lap 20, which seemed like a very fair decision, and Gabby was actually very kind about it. It sounded like he was like, oh, I promise if I don't get like past the next person, I'll give the position back, which I feel like is always the expectation, but it's good whenever you actually vocalize that, and I thought it was very admirable. But he was able to make the pass, and it was probably a good call from the Sauber team to let them switch positions. And as I mentioned, we were kind of hoping that there would be more stops and more strategy involved during this race, but it did kind of just turn into a one-stopper, which is always a little bit annoying, but it is what it is. So at the end of the race, we wound up with Piastri, Norris, Leclerc, Verstappen, Russell, Albon, Hamilton, Lawson, Bortoleto, Gasly, Berman, Hulkenberg, Tsunoda, Stroll, Ocon, Antonelli, Alonso, Sainz, Colapinto, and Hadjar. I don't know what happened to Hadjar this weekend. I didn't even realize he was that far down. I feel like I didn't hear his name at all. Probably because he was in last. I'll have to go back and look at that. Anyway, so let's talk about the Drivers' Championship because it's close, guys. It's still close. I don't think anything's been decided yet. So in first we have Piastri and second we have Norris, obviously. Piastri has 266 points and Norris has 250 points. Those are close. And I really don't think that we know for sure whether either of them, it's only a couple of, that could be one race if one of them doesn't finish. You never know. So exciting things. Then we have Verstappen and Russell and Leclerc in third, fourth, and fifth. A little bit lower down, Verstappen has 185, 157, and 139 respectively for the others. So I don't think that there's much of a shot of them coming back, but it's still interesting to note just how much the McLarens are running away with it. But there is definitely going to be a battle between those two McLarens going forward. Okay, next we're going to do our technical tidbit where I wanted to talk just a little bit about the effects of elevation and air density because Spa is a track that has a lot of elevation changes, and I just thought it would be interesting to talk about the way that those affect the car. So the elevation changes mean a variety of different things, like a whole nother set of forces, essentially, that you don't necessarily have to think about quite as intensely at some other tracks. They tend to do things like adjusting the ride height to account for it because there's a lot of vertical compression forces around 3Gs, for example, in the sudden changes during Eau Rouge. So you really have to make sure that you've accounted for that in the way that you do your ground effect and just making sure that you don't drag or bottom out or anything with your aerodynamic setup. It is located at 400 meters above sea level, which is one of the slightly higher, it's not like Mexico City or a few others. There are definitely places that are at higher elevations, but it is one of the higher ones on the track. And these F1 cars are very developed in the sense that they are very well adapted to elevation changes, but there are still things that had to be considered in the first place. So at higher altitudes, as we know, the air gets thinner, which means that there are less air molecules in essentially every breath that the car takes, and that can affect a few things. So first of all, if you have less air, then you have less cooling. So F1 cars rely on air flowing over their radiators, brake ducts, as well as various heat exchangers just to make sure all of the systems remain cool enough to be able to function, from the engine to the battery and the turbo. At the higher elevations, places where there's thinner air, there's just simply less cooling power available. And so teams have to do things like open up their bodywork, which means adjusting the size and the shape of inlets to make sure that you get enough airflow coming in. But the trade-off is with more cooling, you get more drag. And we've talked a lot about aerodynamics on some episodes in the past, and that can hurt your top speeds, which is a huge factor, especially at a track like Spa, for example. Less air also means less downforce. So as I mentioned, we have talked a lot about aerodynamics previously, but downforce is generated by pushing air over the wings and under the floor of the car. But thinner air, less air to do that means that you just have less aerodynamic grip, so you have to compensate by increasing your wing angles, but again, that means more drag. So it's all part of the puzzle and the balance of setting up this car. And then finally, less air also means less power. So modern Formula One engines use turbochargers to compress air into the engine for combustion. And then at higher altitudes, the turbo has to work harder to make up for the lower air pressure, which can stress components and affect energy recovery systems, or ERS, as well. And then teams also have to monitor how efficiently the mgu-h, which is the motor generator unit heat, which recovers energy from the exhaust system into electrical energy and helps the turbocharger. So they have to make sure to monitor how effective that is and how it's performing, especially when the turbo is under more strain. So with elevation, basically, engineers have to consider, do you want to open up the car so that you have more cooling, so you protect the engine, but you might lose some more top speed? Or do you close everything down to make sure you have that low drag so you get your straight line speed, but you risk overheating? Sometimes teams even bring track-specific cooling packages to just have a very particular balance based on the track that they're at, which they'll consider things like ambient temperature, the forecasted weather for the day, day, any expected traffic, because dirty air is also going to affect these things, and just the driver's general braking and throttle style. For our final segment today, we're going to do a quick preview of the Hungarian Grand Prix, which takes place at the Hungaroring. This is a very tight and twisty circuit just outside of Budapest? I can never figure out how to say that word. It's often nicknamed the Monaco without walls, thanks to its narrow layout and limited overtaking opportunities, but it's very much a driver's circuit. It's very technical, physically demanding, and can be really difficult as well in the summer heat. Despite a little bit of a reputation, as I mentioned, kind of like Monaco, of being a little bit of a tighter racetrack with not as much overtaking, there have been some really iconic moments that happened at this track. So back in 2006, actually, Jenson Button, who is my favorite driver ever, claimed his very first win here in torrential rain after starting 14th on the grid, which is quite iconic. And in 2021, Esteban Ocon actually pulled off a huge upset and won for Alpine after chaos at the start took out several of the front runners who were just kind of always winning that season. And that same race also had a very iconic image of Lewis Hamilton standing alone on the grid while everyone else drove into the pits for slicks, which was definitely a big strategic misfire that went down in infamy. This track does hold a lot of significance for Lewis Hamilton, though. He's won a record there 9 times. It's his most successful circuit, so hopefully it'll be a better weekend for Hamilton than it was this past weekend. And of course, it's also interesting to note that the Hungarian Grand Prix was the first ever Formula One race that was held behind the Iron Curtain back in 1986, and it was what first brought Eastern Europe into Formula One at the height of the Cold War, and the race was a landmark for the global expansion of the sport at the time. So it's a little bit more of a rough and rowdy track, but the Hungaroring has definitely had a very interesting legacy, and I'm excited to see what takes place this weekend. Okay, with that ends our episode for today. I hope that you guys enjoyed. I'm very excited for the Hungarian Grand Prix this weekend. I will be back next week with another recap. Hopefully I get this one up in time, because like I said, I am filming this very early in the morning so that I can hopefully get this up before the weekend, before the actual Hungarian Grand Prix happens. Anyway, yes, I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to like and subscribe. Also, follow us on social media at Grid Girls Formula, or you can follow me at Zoe Elizabeth on most platforms. I always leave the links down below. And yes, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any other ideas or things that you want me to talk about in future episodes, then leave that in the comments below. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Bye!